Okay, so welcome back to another 11 for the 11th of the 11th. We're going to be doing a deep dive today. We're going to be talking a movie called Blood Oath. Even in Australia, this film is not well known, but it's one that really tells the story of the psychological damage of the Pacific conflict, which I'm very excited to talk about that. So let's dive in. We'll get that done in just a sec.
Welcome to Shattered the Podcast,
sharing the lived experience of mental illness on
A father,
a mother.
a family.
Let's go.
Let's go.
Let's go.
Let's go.
I kind of feel like I should paint this helmet silver so I could do a bit of a pattern kind of thing. Anyways, we are talking the film today, Blood Oath. Now, this is a film that came out amongst a whole bunch of other films to do with World War II. It came out around the same time as Changi. Came out about the same time that there was a series on the Cowra breakout, the time when the Japanese prisoners committed mass suicide by some by killing themselves and others by charging guards. And it came out at a time where the perception of what the Japanese did in World War II was not really understood. Now, let's state first and foremost that there are no Japanese today that I believe are alive that committed atrocities during World War II. I think they're all dead now. So we can have nothing against the modern Japanese people. They had nothing to do with what their ancestors did. And I want to be very, very clear that this is not an anti-Japanese podcast by any stretch of the imagination. However, when I talk about the Japanese soldiers in World War II, I'm talking about a different kind of person. Stephen Ambrose said it best when somebody asked him about the atrocities that Allied soldiers perpetrated. And he said that when a city or a village was taken, if it was a platoon of Japanese or German soldiers, the inhabitants would hide for good reason. 99.9% of the time, they're going to get raped, murdered, killed. However, when an Allied unit came into a town, 99.999% of the time, the population was perfectly safe. Children approached Allied soldiers, British, Canadian, Australian, American, because they knew that deep down that these soldiers were good at heart and that they, for the most part, would be incredibly safe and protected. Contrast, of course, with a Japanese platoon or a German platoon marching through Russia, marching through the Pacific. You never knew what you were going to get. And often it was barbarism. Now, that's what Blood Oath is about. The war is finished, and they've got a bunch of dudes that were sadistic guards to the Allied prisoners. Beatings, beheadings, you name it. I mean, seriously. I don't understand the mindset. I can intellectually I can. And it's important to remember that the Japanese soldier was brought up in a very, very brutal army. Beatings of soldiers was very, very common, and particularly of Koreans, who ended up being a lot of the prison guards. They were beaten on by their officers. They had prisoners that they could beat, so they did. They took the opportunity and they became abusive sadists. So in this film, we've got a young bloke who has survived captivity barely. He is weak beyond any kind of ability to live. He's going to die. He's been so abused and battered and starved, and he's so sick that all he can do is just basically try to hang on. Thing is, though, that you can also see in this soldier that he's got massive amount of PTSD from watching his brother be beheaded. And you don't know that initially. You just understand that he saw some horrible things. But this thing in particular is devastating to him. Now, the Australians are in control of the camp at this point, and the Japanese are the prisoners. And tellingly, the Japanese are treated extremely well, and show an arrogance that is unfounded and hard to understand. This one lawyer has to come in and he has to prosecute the Japanese soldiers. And of course, most of the witnesses are dead or they've gone back to Australia. And as soon as somebody says, hey, we want you to see through your trauma and come back to this prison camp to testify, they just didn't want to. So it was very, very hard to gain convictions. And in this movie, there's two guards. There's one who's an interpreter who is a Christian, which is very unusual in the Japanese army. And then there's this sadistic animal. The problem is the Christian participated in a beheading. He beheaded an Allied soldier under orders. Couldn't not do it. So when they came time to convict these guys, because this guy was a self-confessed murderer, they ended up killing him. Blood Oath is an important movie. It's a little movie. Not many people have heard of it, but it just shows the mindset of after World War II, how so many criminals were just allowed to get on with their lives. They were allowed to go home in most cases and hide in anonymity. Some of them became wealthy businessmen. Others became important politicians. And again, don't get me started on Douglas MacArthur. But when that guy decided that they didn't need to seek retribution, I really don't think he understood what some of the men had been through. Because it's interesting because as part of this film, the Japanese told the story of the beheading of these commandos that they caught. And the way they told it is it was very honorable. The men shook hands. They drank sake together. The prisoners shook hands with their beheader, and it was all very polite and military. When in fact, when they found the bodies, they found that many of the men had been hacked to pieces. Clearly, they had not been beheaded in one blow. Some had taken 4, 5, 6. Their arms were tied behind their back with wire. It's important for us, I think, to remember what our diggers in World War One and World War Two went through, but the diggers that we don't really hear their stories, the diggers that went through stuff that, because it's hard to even talk about, it's like it's better to sweep it under the rug. I look at Ben Roberts-Smith at the moment. Now, I don't know if that guy did what he said he did, what people say he did. I can't know. I wasn't there. Even the men that were there can't seem to agree on what's truth and what's not. But this thing of pointing or judging people by a standard that we aren't aware of. I spent many years as a kid very upset over how so many Japanese got away with the absolute barbarism. Doesn't make sense to me. And I mean, you can say exactly the same thing about the Nazis. I guess after the war, the politicians took over and they just wanted to move on. The corporations came in and they wanted to start making money again. The movie is called Blood Oath. If you can find it, I highly recommend it. Watching the young man who watched his brother get tortured and then beheaded, the actor does such a brilliant job of just showing how devastating that was and how his mind tried to hide it from him, tried to shield him, tried to protect him, but then his mind betrayed him as well. There's an old adage that nobody ever wins a fight. You could almost say that about a war. Nobody ever wins a war because too many people lose. Blood Oath, it's an important film, and I certainly hope you'll check it out. I'll speak to you again tomorrow with another 11 for 11. Thank you for listening to Shattered the podcast. I'd like to thank our producer, Meredith Brosnan, our executive producer, Torian Lau, and the band Adelaide for allowing us to use their song as our theme. Go to shatteredthepodcast.com for more information.